Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this special presentation of TED Excellence, the show in which I attempt to educate myself by watching various presentations on various subjects to have a various perspective on various ideas about various things. And sometimes have my brain melted by the subject matter. But hopefully that won't be the case today, at least not in the way it usually is. We'll find out about that as we go. And I come to you live from Crater Valley on the moon with Dogcat Fox, a Pepperjack, and all of you again. Good morning, everyone. So, let's chat for a second. After I have said hello to who is joining me on this ambush stream on a Wednesday afternoon, well, morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Luke Skywalker 2, good morning. Shio Gorath, good morning. Who else is here? Noah Asensio, good morning. Kiro Soldier, good morning. John Miller, good morning. Jen T. Maxey, good morning. Simon Willikins, good morning. Derek LaRue, holy cats. Derek LaRue, thank you so much. That's ridiculously generous of you. And as always, your support and obviously generosity is very much appreciated. Thank you. Hope you are having a good day and enjoy the show. Brittany Holland, good morning. Robert Pincus, good morning. Who else is here? Tall Person, good morning. Orcole Di Stefano, good morning. St. Michael, good morning. Miranda Stone, good morning. And Somnamnum Nation, good morning. Good morning to you all. Before I forget, at the top of the chat box, you take a look at the GoFundMe's posted up there for our friends Maddie, Angry Illinoisian, and Roan Harushan. Take a look at those, please, if you would. If you can donate, please do so. If you can't, that's fine. But if you can, share those out on social media. That is also appreciated. Also, a note before we begin, today's bingo card will be bingo card C. I made a executive decision to pick the bingo card C as in Coleman, or C as in controversy. So what exactly is the controversy? Well, Coleman Hughes, who is a well-known, author, columnist, journalist, speaker, runs the gamut. He did a TED Talk on an argument for colorblindness, or a case for colorblindness, as the title is. And as many of you know who've watched my channel for a long time, I have long argued about the virtues, the actual virtues of colorblindness up against people in various panel discussions and corporate promotional videos and other TED Talks and things who have said colorblindness is bad because you're not acknowledging someone's reality, their identity, this, that, or the other. The sentiment professed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that we should assess one another on the content of our character, not the color of our skin, is apparently racist, as we've been told over and over again. So Coleman Hughes did a talk arguing for colorblindness and the benefits and the positives thereof. And stuff happened. Now, what we're going to do is this is going to be kind of a different setup as previous. Like I said, this is a special presentation. On the basis of the title, this is not a subject that I immediately come to with some kind of opposition. And so we're going to watch the talk. We're going to see what happens and how he plays out his argument, as always, with the TEDx. Or TED Talk, as the case may be. And then afterwards, I'm going to read an article written by Coleman Hughes, where he talks about his experience with TED and the events that took place around the talk, before, during, after, etc. So we're going to all take it in piece by piece. Now, one thing I have to warn you about is that since this is a talk where I probably, I'm guessing, agree with the speaker for the most part, I might not have a whole lot to commentate on, except here and there, depending on the situation. However, I have to pause occasionally because this has to be a transformative work of commentary and or criticism for the sake of YouTube and for the sake of my channel. So every few seconds, every few statement or so, I will pause to interject, even if it's only to say, yes, I agree. Hopefully there'll be some space for something more than that, but just a warning ahead of time, because usually I don't take on topics that I'm already very well familiar with or have nothing to say about. Obviously, I have a lot to say about the positives of colorblindness as a principle, but Coleman Hughes will probably articulate it much more effectively than I could. Anyway, before I move on from that, C. Thomas, thank you so much, Scribe. C. Thomas. Polite acknowledgement. All right. Anyway, so let's get moving with this. Let's see. This clocks in at just over 13 minutes. So just a little bit on the average side of your TEDx talk usually. Again, bingo card C, and the links to the bingo cards are in the description. Yes, it still deserves a bingo card. So we'll see how that goes. I'll start off with a few seconds for a sound test. You guys tell me if you can hear it, and then we will proceed.
I want to do a quick exercise. Close your eyes. I want you to picture your best friend.
My best friend? Abba Zabba? You my only friend. Actually, for the sake of most TEDx talks, I think Pepperjack is my best friend. But thank you, Alan Thyler, for the Hiya Dogcat Fox. Oh, Dogcat Fox.
Wowee, wow, wow.
And that's an irate Alex Dogcat Fox. Thanks so much, Alan. Hope you're having a good day so far. All right, so close your eyes. Picture that. Everybody hear that okay? 5x5, says Kiro Soldier. Non-Vitae Rex, hello. Anybody else I missed in the meantime? Ryan R, did I already say hello? If I didn't, hello. And all right, well, Kiro Soldier, I'll take your word for it.
Think about what specifically you love about them.
Oh, Pepperjack, why do I love you? Oh, you make me so happy. You loosen me up, make me all goosey-woosey, and see if it's
What trait makes them them?
Dr. Pepper and Jack Daniels.
Now open your eyes. I don't know what each of you came up with, but I'm pretty sure I know what you didn't come up with.
I bet you it's skin color. Is it skin color?
I'm pretty sure none of you thought what makes Jim Jim is the fact that he's 6'2" and a redhead.
You're probably right. Yeah, you see. This is going to be the problem with this one. I have a feeling that everything he's going to say is stuff that I've been preaching and argumenting against, or using as a rejoinder to so much stuff that I've looked at over the last 7 years. It's gonna feel like I'm listening to myself.
I'm guessing you chose their inner qualities, their sense of humor, their generosity, their intelligence.
Yes.
Qualities they would have no matter what they looked like. There's one more quality I'm pretty sure you didn't choose. Their race.
Probably not, unless you're a racist.
Of all the things you could list about somebody, their race is just about the least interesting you could name. Right down there with height and hair color.
Unless you're a racist, of course.
Sure, race can be good source material for jokes at a comedy club, but in the real world, a person's race doesn't tell you whether they're kind or selfish, whether their beliefs are right or wrong, whether they'll become your best friend or your worst enemy.
Yes. Again, all I can really say is amen. Exactly. Yeah, a similar example I've used very many times before. If I describe to you a male with a beard, long hair, and is a carpenter, am I talking about Jesus Christ, or am I talking about serial killer Israel Keys? You don't know, because none of those elements say anything about a person's character. They're just surface level aesthetics.
But over the past 10 years, our societies have become more and more fixated on racial identity.
Yes.
We've all been invited to reflect on our inner whiteness or inner blackness as if these racial essences define who we are.
Yeah, and well, I'll save my anecdotal stories as we go because I have to have material for pausing here and there. But no, he's right, and this is what let's see, from about 2014 onward is when this really started bubbling up. At least in my little sphere of the world, I started noticing this initially on the fringes of conversations and things, and then of course as I chronicled events over the course of time on my channel and elsewise, became entirely mainstream.
Meanwhile, American society has experienced the greatest crisis in race relations in a generation.
George Floyd?
Gallup has been asking Americans how they feel about race relations, and this chart is the result.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, between 2001 and 2013, most Americans felt good about race relations. Then both lines take a nosedive.
Yeah, was that around the time of Black Lives Matter by any chance? Yeah, I've been wondering for several years now if Black Lives Matter and associated such organizations, if their intention is to defeat racism or improve race relations, how's that been going?
It's no exaggeration to call this one of the greatest crises of our time. And clearly, we need new ways of thinking about race if we're going to reverse this trend.
I don't know if we need new ways of thinking about race. I think we need to go back to how we were thinking about it, let's say from 2007 up through 2013. We need to dismiss race as a consideration in any estimation of someone's value, character, worth, or otherwise. But I'll see what he has to say.
So today I'm going to offer an old idea, but it's an idea that's been widely misunderstood.
Okay.
You've probably heard it before.
Yep.
It's called color blindness.
Mm-hmm.
What do I mean by color blindness?
Well, I'm going to guess you mean setting aside race as a value factor in assessing someone's worth, character, etc. To make race as relevant to your assessment of someone as their hair color, eye color, or height, as you've previously described.
After all, we all see race. We can't help it.
Uh-huh.
And what's more, race can influence how we're treated and how we treat other people. So in that sense, nobody is truly colorblind.
Yes, it's not a literal declaration of a physiological disorder. It's true, even though that is the argument that is used by many people to counter the argument for colorblindness as a principle. So.
But to interpret the word colorblind so literally
Yes.
is to misunderstand it.
Yes.
Colorblind is a word like warm-hearted. It uses a physical metaphor to capture an abstract idea.
Excellent comparison.
To call someone warm-hearted isn't to talk about the temperature of their heart, but about the kindness of their soul.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, to advocate for colorblindness is not to pretend you don't notice race. It's to support a principle.
Yes. Like I say, for the most part, I can only imagine that most of what I'm going to say over the course of my pauses in this is amen to one extent or another. Or say some hellos. Zalbla, hello. Grand Inquisitor Tyr Alexander, hello. Frankie Deller, hello. Poker Pierce, hello.
That we should try our best to treat people without regard to race,
Yes.
both in our personal lives and in our public policy.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be thinking, what's so controversial about that?
You're right. I have thought that most of my entire life, and most pointedly over the last 7 years or so, doing YouTube and taking a look at speakers and intellectuals and academics that argue against it as though it were a bad thing. Because, to deny someone's race is to deny their identity, even though purportedly racial identitarianism is poison, depending on what race we're talking about. But it should be poison regardless,
Well, the fact is, the philosophy of colorblindness is under attack.
Mm-hmm.
Critics say that it's naive, or that we're not yet ready for it as a society, or even that it's white supremacy in disguise.
Well, it's not just been under attack. It's been under attack for several years now, but I get your meaning if people haven't thought about it that much. Irving Spider-Man, hello. Jamie Jam, pardon me, hello.
And many people agree with these feelings.
Uh-huh.
For example, a few years ago, a young adult fantasy author came under pressure to halt the release of her new book.
We talking about like J.K. Rowling? Or I guess it could be anybody.
Why?
Why?
Because the marketing blurb for the book went like this. In a world where the princess is the monster, oppression is blind to skin color, and good and evil exist in shades of gray. Now that one sentence clause about oppression being blind to skin color, describing a fantasy world, mind you, was enough to provoke an online backlash.
Oh boy, go talk to Wizards of the Coast and orcs. You think fantasy worlds should be immune to this kind of stuff? Oh man, we've known this for quite a while now. Yeah, talk about orcs and what the righteous say that orcs actually represent, and tell me how they're not the racist ones.
Now, part of this reaction to colorblindness is actually the fault of its advocates. People will say things like, "I don't see color," as a way of expressing support for colorblindness.
I mean, admittedly, it is kind of an awkward phrase. If there was a more efficient, rolls off the tongue well terminology for it to distinguish it from an actual, physiological condition, I'm sure we'd use it, but there really isn't. But then, again, like your example of warm-hearted, thinking people could tell the difference if they wanted to.
But this phrase is guaranteed to produce confusion because you do see color, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we should all get rid of this phrase and replace it with what we really mean to say, which is, I try to treat people without regard to race.
Yeah, no, that would be nice, just not quite as catchy. Not quite as catchy. Hello, Funk Joel brother and your ridiculous lunatic. Good morning or afternoon.
Now that said, most of the pushback to colorblindness comes from critics who misrepresent it as somehow a conservative idea.
Yes.
Now, this could not be further from the truth.
Yeah, if you want to go back to, again, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. expressed effectively the exact same sentiment in his I Have a Dream speech. And if you want to call the civil rights movement as a conservative movement, you might be on the wrong side of history.
The philosophy of colorblindness does not come from conservatives. It actually comes from the radical wing of the anti-slavery movement in the 19th century. The earliest mentions of colorblindness come from Wendell Phillips, who was the president of the American Anti-Slavery Society and a man whose nickname was Abolition's Golden Trumpet.
No, obviously a MAGA Republican, if I'm not, let's say. Shadowclaw, hello, and Vercingetorix, hello.
He believed in immediate full equality for Black Americans, and in 1865, he called for the creation of a, quote, government colorblind, by which he meant the permanent end of all laws that mention race.
Huh. Gosh, it's kind of a precursor to, what's that, the Civil Rights Act?
What about the other critiques of colorblindness?
Okay.
Wouldn't colorblindness render us unable to fight racism? Wouldn't it mean getting rid of policies like affirmative action that benefit people of color?
Yes! And by the way, this talk was given in April of this year, 2023. So just a couple of months before affirmative action was annihilated by the Supreme Court. So, I wonder what, I'm sure he's done something on it by now. I wonder what Coleman Hughes has to say about the end of affirmative action.
I believe that eliminating race-based policies does not equal eliminating policies meant to reduce inequality.
Okay. So you're for affirmative action?
It simply means that those policies should be executed on the basis of class instead of race.
Oh, okay. I see. All right. Okay. Yeah. And I've argued for that as well. If you're going to try to give someone a leg up in life, it should be based on circumstance that affects people and not on demographic basis.
Why class over race?
Because it's more fair.
I'll give two reasons.
Mm-hmm.
First, because class is almost always a better proxy for true disadvantage than race.
Very good.
Imagine we picked 10 Americans at random.
Okay.
And our task is to sort them from least privileged on one end to most privileged on the other.
Right. And if you decide to assess that on their aesthetics, you're probably going to be wrong. But even if you're not wrong, you're the one assessing someone's advantages or disadvantages in the world on the basis of what they look like. And so, what does that say about you?
Now, there's no direct measure of privilege, so we have to choose a proxy measure.
Oh, excuse me. There is a direct measure of privilege. If you're straight, white, and male, you're obviously the most privileged individual on the planet. We know this. I've been told this all the time. So, that's just the truth. We know, right?
My claim here is that lining them up by income or wealth would get us closer to achieving that task than simply lining people up by race.
Yes.
That's what I mean when I say that class is usually a better proxy for disadvantage than race.
Yes.
And the second reason is that class-based policies tend to be more popular and less controversial because they don't penalize anyone for immutable biological traits.
Yes. Again, I apologize. I wish I had something more insightful to say here, but he's repeating the exact same things I've been saying for years, and I'm sure that he's been saying for years, and that most rational people would probably agree with. Assess someone on the basis of who they are, the circumstances they find themselves in, not on the basis of what they look like or something they have no control over.
Think of policies like need-based financial aid or the earned income tax credit. These are policies that address inequality without anyone having to feel the sting of racial discrimination.
Right. Yeah. And that's not to say that you can't have an issue with, there's some people who are prideful enough that they don't want to take charity, right? They don't want to see the circumstances they find themselves in as a weakness or that they have to have pity taken upon them and things like that. That can also be a factor. But at least then, it's a situation that could be changed. It's a situation that could do with some extra help if you can't make it on your own for circumstances outside of your control, which can be economic, but you're not being branded for what you look like. And now I suddenly have a leaf blower in the background. I don't know how much of that is going to be picked up as I proceed. If it gets really bad, guys, let me know and I don't know what I'll do. I can't do anything about it.
I want to give you an example of a disastrous race-based policy.
Okay.
It was called the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Over 70,000 restaurants closed in 2020 due to the pandemic. And this fund allocated $29 billion to help these restaurants.
Based on the color of the owners, right?
But for the first 3 weeks of the program, only people of color, women, and veterans could apply.
Veterans! Veterans, again, just like with ERGs, veterans make a certain level of sense because this is a circumstance you're in because of a personal sacrifice, because of a notion of your own personal merit. And here comes the leaf blower closer and closer to my window. Oh boy. Did I pick the time to do this? I hope it doesn't become annoying, guys. I don't know if the microphone's picking it up. Hopefully the sound cancellation will help with that. Speaking of which, let me check my microphone real quick to make sure that that's set up correctly. Let's see. Echo cancellation. Can you guys hear that? You hear nothing? Okay, then I won't worry about it too much. Anyway, yes, veterans. Veterans I might not have a problem with. When it comes to all the other stuff.
So soon after it began, white male restaurant owners sued, alleging discrimination. A judge ruled in their favor, and the program was stopped. But by that time, 2/3 of the money was already gone.
Of course it was.
And it wasn't just white men that got discriminated against in this policy.
No.
Around 3,000 women and people of color were promised money before the judge stopped the program, and then unpromised that money just after.
Right. When you set things up like this, everybody loses ultimately, except for the people that don't, and they get it unfairly. Oh, leaf blower guy, go away. There's not that many leaves around my house. Go away.
And the remaining $10 billion then went to white men who had initially been put at the back of the line.
Right.
So the net result of this policy was a double dose of discrimination. Initially, thousands of white men were discriminated against, and then thousands of women and people of color were discriminated against.
Yes.
And it's a virtual guarantee that there are people out there who lost their restaurant in both of those camps because they were the wrong skin color.
Yep.
Can anyone really argue that a colorblind program wouldn't have produced better results for everybody?
People do argue against that because obviously if you are a particular skin color, you are underserved, marginalized, undervalued on the basis of what you are. Regardless of your personal circumstances, you represent something larger than yourself on the basis of your aesthetics and demographic fit. So yeah, I have heard those arguments before. They don't make a whole lot of sense, but people do argue it.
So I just gave an example of a disastrous race-based policy. Now I want to give you an example of a colorblind policy that has worked quite well.
Okay.
America has been struggling with the issue of racial bias in policing for a very long time.
Mm.
And a solution to one aspect of this problem is to issue tickets using traffic cameras instead of human beings.
Right, because then you have objective evidence and it's based on the actual actions of the car and not on the basis of what an officer might observe of the driver.
Cops can be racially biased, consciously or not,
yes.
But traffic cameras, red light cameras, and speeding cameras can't.
Well, unless the cameras differentiate between the skin color of the driver because of AI infiltration or something. I'm waiting for the day that comes out.
So you would think anyone interested in reducing racial bias in policing would support these traffic cameras, but you'd be wrong.
Well, I can believe that someone would argue against it. So what is the argument?
Some have opposed them on the grounds that they don't yield statistically equal ticketing rates by race. And they were
okay. All right. So if you take race out of the equation of assessing who gets a traffic ticket or not, and the results end up having a disparity between the races, what does that tell you? I don't know what that's supposed to tell you, but then what is the argument?
By race, and they remain illegal in many US states. So here's an example where the philosophy of colorblindness cuts through confusion like a knife.
Should.
If we're guided by colorblindness, our goal should be to eliminate bias from systems that affect people's lives wherever possible, not to manufacture statistically equal outcomes by any means necessary.
Yeah, well, that's called equity. And I've been told that that's the best thing ever, right? Equality of outcome. We must achieve equality of outcome for all people, regardless of their capabilities, regardless of their actions, etc. Oh boy. Thank you, C. Thomas. I've been shafted by employers and verbally abused for being the accepted target of scorn. I miss the days when some things weren't a one-way street. It's such a cliche to feel like the good old days were the good old days, right? It feels like an old man thing to say, back in my day, et cetera, and so forth. But I tell you, I wish our society, to a certain extent, not in everything, but to a certain extent, was on the same trajectory that it was roundabouts, let's say, the year 2000. But before so much of this garbage has happened and people have tried to profit off of it and leverage hate against each other and divide and so on and so forth. It just seemed like around 2000, maybe it was just the Y2K hopeful kind of mentality, but just around there, it felt like things were really on an upward trajectory for all of us, societally speaking. Obviously, there would be terrible things to come and so on and so forth, but feels like we've missed a step or three, doesn't it? Just a bit. Anyway, thank you, C. Thomas. Whoops. And then you're ridiculous lunatic. Traffic cams usually cannot determine who's operating the vehicle. It's true. I know. I'm just saying that, theoretically speaking, if someone's going to be arguing against traffic cams, they'd, bring up some kind of like artificial intelligence or something else and blah, blah, blah. Cameras can't recognize this, that, or the other. It's been made before. Anyway.
So my talk has been focused on America, but my message is really for any key decision maker at any institution anywhere in the world.
Yes.
If you care about fighting racism, embrace colorblindness.
And it's so ridiculous to me that that statement needs to be stated, right? That needs to be voiced at all. And if you're interested in fighting racism, stop using race as an evaluative factor of someone. It just, it just, and so anybody who argues against the principle of colorblindness, I'm like, so you want racial evaluation of people. You're advocating for racial discrimination, right? It has never made any sense, has blown my mind for years. It's so ridiculous that this needs to be said in this day, in the current year.
Support class-based policies.
Sure.
Create colorblind processes in your own world.
Yeah.
If you're a professor, grade your students' papers blind to their names. Think creatively about how to apply colorblindness to your life.
Mm-hmm.
Colorblindness is the best principle by which to govern a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy.
Yes. Again, amen.
It's the best way to lower the temperature of tribal conflict in the long run.
Yes.
And if we wait for the moment when society is ready for it, we'll be waiting forever.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, see, and that's, didn't we start this process in 1964? Or shouldn't we have started this process in 1964? Like I've said, laws are both an apology and an acknowledgement of human failing and a promise to do better. This whole thing, at least for this country, was started in legal terms in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act. Wasn't that lesson already in place? Weren't we already working forward from that belief system since 1964? Shouldn't we have been? We have taken such dramatic steps backwards, where in 2023, you have to have a man stand on a stage and tell you that if you want to end racism, stop being racist. Okay, but here's the thing. That's the end of his talk, but there's still 3 minutes left. And I don't know what happens next because I haven't watched this yet. So what goes on for the next 3 minutes? Okay, you got a pretty good, it's not everybody, but it's a good portion of the audience is standing up and clapping. All right.
Coleman, thank you for this. You know, Melody Hobson came to TED a few years ago, and she had a very different message for us. She said, be color brave, not colorblind. All right?
Ah, yes, color brave. I haven't heard that in a little bit. Yeah, color brave, not colorblind.
The argument was that being colorblind is dangerous because it's effectively ignoring the problem. What would you want to say to her?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I would say is, like I said, colorblindness as a philosophy, that is the goal. That's an idea that comes from the anti-slavery movement, right? No. That's not an example of ignoring the problem. That's an example of having the best philosophy with which to address the problem.
Well, I would dive into the idea of racial identitarianism being poison in and of itself. Oh, come on. Okay, leaf blower guy's like 3 feet outside my window right now. Come on. There aren't that many leaves, I swear. You know, sometimes I wonder if, you know, I suppose it just might be a contract thing. You have to go out to a location, you're contracted to go out and run the leaf blower for a certain amount of time in order to fulfill your contract. But there really aren't that many leaves outside. Hey, caramba. If you guys can't hear it, I can, and it's bleeding through my headset and everything. So thankfully for sound cancellation. It's bugging the heck out of me. Anyway, what I was trying to say is my response to the color brave thing is to talk about the poison of racial identitarianism. To go back to a movement that I first became aware of in the 90s after the Oklahoma City bombing. I've talked about this several times, so apologies for those of you that have heard it before. There's a book I bought way back then called The Gathering Storm, and it was written by members of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Back when the Southern Poverty Law Center might have actually been a useful organization, not so much these days. Either way, This book talked about the evolution of the white supremacist movement in America, from the KKK to the militia movement, and specifically about the white and or Christian identity movement, which is no different than racial supremacy to say, if you are white or if you are Christian, you are a superior human being, preferably white and Christian, according to these guys, than everybody else. It was just racism with a new brand name. But it's the first time when I was a kid anyway, to learn about the concept of white identity or racial identity. And what is racial identitarianism? By putting race first, and to say, this marks you as a member of a society. This tells you something about the value of a person. And being color brave leans straight into racial identitarianism. And just as Coleman has articulated, though not specifically, racial identitarianism is poison. Anyway, C. Thomas, thank you again. Colorblind philosophy equals libertarianism, but for race. Yes. I mean, egalitarianism. Egalitarianism all by itself. Treat everybody equally regardless of all these other issues and things. But yeah, no. Anyway, so yeah, the argument of color brave, not color blind, is someone advocating for racial discrimination.
In my view.
But could you argue that dealt with one part of the problem, but in today's world, there are still many situations where it's not enough. So to take the story of...
Wait a sec. I just got to ask a question I don't know the answer to. Most TED Talks, TEDx Talks that we've watched, we've seen the person end their presentation, and then they walk off the stage. Right? Now, I don't know if this is, now, granted, those are mostly TEDx talks that we watch. Is having someone come up after the person's presentation is concluded to further discuss with them their subject matter, is that normal for a TED Talk? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. So this is unique in my experience to see someone come up afterwards and have a sort of rebuttal Q&A. So I'm curious about that. Sorry, let me hit the button. Come on, button.
That dealt with one part of the problem, but in today's world, there are still many situations where it's not enough. So to take the story of, so here's an orchestra, right? An orchestra, and it's largely white. And that doesn't feel right. So they institute a policy of colorblindness where...
Does a disparity equate to an inequity, though? That'd be my first response. That doesn't seem right.
All right. So they institute a policy of colorblindness where there can't be any racial discrimination because new musicians are auditioned behind a screen. That's colorblind. So far, so good. And maybe that helps. But maybe the actual situation is that the minority kids in that area just don't have access to instruments. It's just harder for them ever to get the kind of training and stuff they need. And that the orchestra needs to be taking a lead to bring people through so that there are people in that orchestra who can inspire other kids and so forth.
If you don't have the skills necessary to achieve the heights of that organization, then is it the organ? Well, then how about the organization hold a separate open classes for musicians? And then if you meet the skills requirement, then you get into the orchestra. Why would the orchestra want to press gang people into positions that they're not qualified for, just on the basis of their skin color? You're not solving the problem with that idea there. You see, taking pity on people because of what they look like. Okay, you think that's a better way of doing it?
Yeah, so I would propose a different. So if I were leading that orchestra, what I would do is I'd say, let's continue to audition everyone behind the veil, be colorblind in that sense, and then let's separately invest in the community so that we can get kids instruments.
Yeah, exactly. You equal opportunity, right? But not equality of outcome. There you go.
When they're young, and then judge them by a colorblind standard when they come to audition. See, if you rig it at this level, then you're just changing the bar by which you would measure progress to begin with, right? So I think that is a kind of an artificial solution, whereas we want to maintain colorblind standards but actually address the root causes of the problem.
Yeah, like I say, have open classes, open resources to everybody, and then if they make the grade, through a colorblind process, then you end up in the orchestra. That should be the goal. Equal opportunity, not equality of outcome. Ta-da!
Coleman, you're an incredibly powerful voice on this issue, and I really thank you for the courage to come here, make this case. And
Thank you,
good luck
Chris.
with the book.
Thank you, Ted.
Coleman Hughes, thank you.
Okay, so that is the presentation as it was published on the TED YouTube channel. And again, I found that, I don't know if that's regular. I don't know if it's usual to have somebody come up and do a rebuttal questionnaire afterwards. Maybe it is. Maybe that's so. Maybe all the other videos cut off there, or I just haven't seen TED Talks where they've done that. So that is the end result. But what was the behind the scenes, the rigmarole, and everything else? Well, before we get there, sorry, I'm getting myself a little bit ahead of the game here. Let's at least go over the TEDx bingo card and see if there's any chance that we have any bingos on here. So let's start off. Plays victim. No. And I'll go over it once, guys. If you have arguments for squares to be circled, just hold on to them. Plays victim. No. Leaves out vital context. No. Weightless example. No. Anecdote that probably never happened. No. Benevolent condescension. No. Even though I did point out the ridiculousness of having to specify to someone, if you want to end racism, be colorblind. That's not benevolent condescension, unfortunately. That's just the way things are. Self-vilification or wretchedness. No. Feminism. No. Childhood or family anecdote. He never talked about himself or his family. Privilege. He did say the word privilege. Oh, we're not going to get a whiteout on this one. So circling that one and free space. Let me get those saved there and get that. All right. Sales pitch for product or service. No, he never mentioned a book or anything. Microaggressions or unconscious bias. He did talk about unconscious bias in policing at one point. So there was that. All right, let's do that one. Patriarchy, no. Economic disparity, yes. He talked about class-based systems rather than race-based systems. Mind reading assumes motives. Not that I recall. I don't think there was anything quite that blatant, but I'm happy to be corrected. Attempt to coin new buzzword or buzz phrase. He did, and he gave his alternative to color blindness, which, again, is technically accurate, doesn't roll off the tongue, but it is there. Word salad, not in my opinion. Diversity, equity, and or inclusion. Well, he talked about equity when he talked about equitable outcomes there near the end there with the orchestra. So, yes, that did come up. Marginalized or marginalization. That... I don't know they ever used the words, but it was definitely implied. I'm not going to circle it quite yet. I'm open for arguments. Contradicts own point or argument. Not that I saw. Systemic or institutional. Yes. At least certainly in aggregate, if not in specific. He talked about different systems and so on and etc. Okay. A list. Did he give us an actual list? 1, 2, 3. I don't. Not that I recall. I could be mistaken. White supremacy. Again, by implication, through talking about slavery and so on. So circling that one. Argumentative non sequitur. Not that I recall. It was a pretty tight presentation. And lastly, collectivizes own demographic. No. In the sense that he never associated himself to it that I can recall. But I'm happy to be argued with elsewise. Anyway, that's the card as I have it. If you have arguments for squares to be circled, put them in the chat now. I won't take too long with this because I want to get to the article that is Coleman Hughes's recitation of events surrounding the presentation. Let's see. Skid Caesar. You, my guy, Scribe. I always feel fortunate to catch a live stream. The TEDs are my fave. Well, appreciate it, Skid. Thank you so much. Glad you enjoy them. Let's see. Oh, Shadowclaw. Christians aren't white supremacists. White supremacists can claim to be Christian. In Christ, there is no color, nationality, creed, etc. Scribelight. Sorry for sounding preachy. No, like I say, I wasn't making an evaluation. I was just saying that that's what they called themselves. It was the Christian and/or white identity movement, etc. So that's their nomenclature. It's not a declaration on my part. It was just for clarification. Frankie Deller, yeah, the guy wasn't a batshit race grifting leftist. I think this is a first for a TED Talk. Well, like I say, it's one of the rare ones where I was like, I don't know if I'd have anything to say. I did. I had to conjure it here and there. Ivor Singatorius, have you seen Coleman's debate and response to the debate surrounding this presentation? Yes, actually. I was in the live chat for that one. Granted that if so long as the chat was recorded when they broadcasted on YouTube, I was actually in the chat, and I believe there's a comment of mine in the comments. If we're both talking about the same one, he did a debate between himself and another person about colorblindness around the same time that this came out. So I think that's what we're talking about. If it's not, then maybe he talked about it somewhere else. I apologize if it's otherwise. I'm not seeing any arguments for other squares to be circled, so I don't think we get any bingos on this one. Even if you did have another square or two to argue for, I think overall, say for certain subject matter, a relatively solid presentation. I mean, as far as like putting that persuasive essay template in the forefront of my brain, he did an excellent job. Now, that's not to say that an excellent TED or TEDx can't end up with some circles on the bingo card, but all the same, there you go. But anyway, sorry to rush through that, but I did want to get to the article covering the ins and the outs of this. Let me switch up my overlays real quick for clarity here. There's that. How about that? There we go. And then let's zoom in a smidge, shall we? All right, so let's take a look at Coleman Hughes's article talking about his experience with TED. This was published on Tuesday, September 26th, 2023. And if you'll recall, the presentation was given in April of 2023. Is TED scared of color blindness? Watch now, 13 minutes. The organization's tagline is ideas worth spreading, but they attempted to suppress mine. Okay, so we've just watched the presentation, so let's take a look. Like any young writer, I am well aware that an invitation to speak at TED can be a career-changing opportunity. So you can imagine how thrilled I was when I was invited to appear at this year's annual conference. What I could not have imagined from an organization whose tagline is ideas worth spreading is that it would attempt to suppress my own. As an independent podcaster and author, I count myself among the lucky few who can make a living doing what they truly love to do. Nothing about my experience with TED could change that. The reason this story matters is not because I was treated poorly, but because it helps explain how organizations can be captured by an ideological minority that bends even the people at the very top to its will. In that, the story of TED is the story of so many crucial and once trustworthy institutions in American life. Holy cats. What an opener. Let's go back to the start. This past April, I gave a talk at the yearly TED conference in Vancouver, Canada. In my talk, I defended colorblindness, the idea that we should treat people without regard to race, both in our personal lives and in our public policy. This is also the topic of my forthcoming book. Even though a majority of Americans believe that colorblind policies are the right approach to governing a racially diverse society, we live in a strange moment in which many of our elite believe that colorblindness is, in fact, a Trojan horse for white supremacy. Taking that viewpoint seriously, while ultimately refuting it, was the express purpose of my talk. As you might imagine, TED is an unbelievably well-oiled machine. In the weeks and months leading up to the conference, I wrote my talk, revised it in conjunction with TED's curation team, and cleared it with their fact-checkers. I have never prepared more thoroughly for a talk. On April 19th, I stopped on stage in front of an audience of nearly 2,000 people and delivered it. TED draws a progressive crowd, so I expected that my talk might upset a handful of people. And indeed, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a handful of scowling faces. But the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The audience applauded. Some people even stood up. Throughout the meals and in hallways, people approached me to say they loved it, and those who disagreed with it offered smart and thoughtful criticisms. But the day after my talk, I heard from Chris Anderson, the head of TED. He told me that a group called Black at TED, which TED's website describes as a, quote, employee resource group that exists to provide a safe space for TED staff who identify as Black, unquote, was upset by my talk. Over email, Chris asked if I'd be willing to speak with them privately and have a struggle session, I'm sure. I agreed to speak with them on principle, that principle being that you should always speak with your critics because they may expose crucial blind spots in your worldview. That is, in part, what motivates me to look at TEDx talks and TED talks of subject matter that I might otherwise disregard. No sooner did I agree to speak with them than Chris told me that Black at TED actually was not willing to speak to me. I never learned why. I hope that this strange about face was the end of the drama, but it was only the beginning. On the final day of the conference, TED held its yearly town hall at which the audience can give feedback on the conference. The event opened with two people denouncing my talk back to back. The first woman called my talk racist, as well as dangerous and irresponsible, comments that were met with cheers from the crowd. The second commentator, Otho Kerr, a program director at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, claimed that I was, quote, willing to have us slide back into the days of separate but equal, unquote. And then parenthetical, the talk is online, so you can judge for yourself whether those accusations bear any resemblance to reality. In my opinion, they do not. In response to their comments, Anderson took the mic and thanked them for their remarks. He also reminded the audience that, quote, TED can't shy away from controversy on issues that matter so much, unquote, a statement I very much agreed with and appreciated. Because he said as much, I left the conference fairly confident that TED would release and promote my talk just like any other, in spite of the staff and audience members who were upset by it. 2 weeks later, Anderson emailed to tell me that there was, quote unquote, blowback on my talk, and that, quote, some internally are arguing we shouldn't post it, unquote. In the email, he told me that the, quote, most challenging, unquote, blowback had come from a well-known social scientist, parenthetical, who I later learned was Adam Grant. I don't know who that is. He quoted from Grant's message directly. All right. So this comes from Adam Grant, quote, really glad to see TED offering viewpoint diversity. We need more conservative voices. Let me try that one again for a second. For those of you in the cheap seats, remember we're talking about disregarding color as an estimation of someone's worth or value in society. Really glad to see TED offering viewpoint diversity. We need more conservative voices. But as a social scientist, I was dismayed to see Coleman Hughes deliver an inaccurate message. His case for colorblindness is directly contradicted by an extensive body of rigorous research. For the state of the science, see Leslie Bono, you too, Kim and Beaver, 2020 Journal of Applied Psychology. In a meta-analysis of 296 studies, they found that whereas color-conscious models reduce prejudice and discrimination, color-blind approaches often fail to help and sometimes backfire. Okay, so a guy gets up on a stage, promotes a theory of his about how we should behave, and because some other people disagree with it, you should take it off the air? What? Thank you, C. Thomas. Progs live a very warped and demented non-reality. Some do. The extremes do. The people who are blinded to reality do. I mean, there was a time where progressive wasn't a dirty word and can still be something that is a mark of someone's virtue in a way, but certainly that's gone by the wayside in the last several years. Back to Coleman Hughes. I read the paper that Grant referenced titled, quote, On Melting Pots and Salad Bowls, a meta-analysis of the effects of identity-blind and identity-conscious diversity ideologies, unquote, expecting to find arguments against color blindness. I was shocked to find that the paper largely supported my talk. In the results section, the authors wrote that, quote, colorblindness is negatively related to stereotyping, and, quote, it is also negatively related to prejudice, unquote. They also found that, quote, meritocracy is negatively related to discrimination, unquote. I wrote back to Anderson, the guy running the TED Talks, quote, far from a refutation of my talk, this meta-analysis is closer to an endorsement of it. The only anti-color blindness finding in the paper is that color blindness and meritocracy are associated with opposing DEI policies. Oh, yeah. Well, they do oppose DEI policies because DEI policies are inherently racist, sexist, discriminatory, etc. Back to Coleman. Well, I do oppose race-based DEI policies in most, but not all cases, unapologetically. But that is a philosophical disagreement, not an example of me delivering incorrect social science. I feel it would be unjustified not to release my talk simply because many people disagree with my philosophical perspective. By that standard, most TED Talks would never get released, unquote. Exactly. To which he responded, quote, thanks, Coleman, great note, more soon, unquote. Before this email exchange, I hadn't seriously considered the possibility that TED might not post my talk at all. What's more, the fact that the, quote, most challenging, unquote, blowback to my talk was a social science paper showing that color blindness reduces stereotyping and prejudice puzzled me. About a week later, I received an email from Whitney Pennington Rogers, the current affairs curator at TED and the point person for the curation of my talk. Whitney said that in lieu of releasing my talk, Whitney said that in lieu of releasing my TED Talk normally, TED was inviting me to, to participate in a moderated conversation that we would publish as an extension of your talk, unquote. Again, that sounds sneakily like a struggle session. I'm always happy to converse and debate, so I agreed. Too hastily, in retrospect. I had assumed that the phrase, quote, an extension of your talk, unquote, was meant metaphorically, i.e. that this, quote unquote, moderated conversation would be a separate video. Only later in the email exchange did I realize that it was meant literally. In other words, TED wanted my talk and this moderated conversation to be released as a single combined video. I had two problems with this. First, it would hold the release of my TED Talk hostage to the existence of this other moderated conversation, which at the time was not guaranteed to happen at all. Secondly, I worried that tacking a debate to the end of my TED Talk would effectively put an asterisk next to it. It would imply that my argument ought not be heard without also hearing the opposing perspective, that it shouldn't be absorbed without a politically palate-cleansing chaser. Given that my talk had passed the initial fact-checking, the curation team, and had been cleared by Anderson and Rogers themselves, I saw no reason why it wouldn't be released and promoted as any other talk would be. I told Rogers as much over a Zoom call. Because she and I were unable to come to an agreement, I had a follow-up call with Anderson. On that call, he conceded that his employees' anger stemmed from political bias, but nevertheless asked me to agree to an atypical release strategy. TED would release the debate and the talk as separate videos, but at the same time. He sold this idea to me as a way to amplify my talk, as if this atypical release strategy were conceived for my benefit. That made little sense to me. The reality, I told him, was that these non-standard release strategies were intended not to amplify my message, but to dilute it. After all, the whole genesis of this debacle was the fact that certain TED staffers wanted to nix my talk altogether, and Anderson feared an internal firestorm if my talk were released normally. Clearly, the release proposals being pressed upon me were conceived in order to placate angry staffers, not in order to amplify my message. By the end of the calls, we had reached a compromise. TED would release and promote my talk as they would any other, and I would participate in a debate that would be released as a separate video no fewer than 2 weeks after my talk. I held up my end of the bargain. TED did not. My talk was posted on the TED website on July 28th. The debate was posted 2 weeks later. By the time the debate came out, I had moved on. I assumed that TED held up its end of the bargain and was no longer paying close attention. Then, on August 15th, Tim Urban, a popular blogger who delivered one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time, pointed out that my talk had only a fraction of the views of every other TED Talk released around the same time. Urban tweeted, quote, "There have been 1 million talks about race at TED. For this talk, and only for this talk, was the speaker required to publicly debate his points after the talk as a condition for having it posted online. As it is, the lack of standard promotion by TED has Coleman's talk at about 10% of the views of all the other talks surrounding his on their site, unquote. 2 days later, I checked to see if Tim was onto something. As of August 17th, the 2 talks released just before mine had 569,000 and 787,000 views, respectively, on TED's website. The 2 talks released immediately after mine, videos that had less time to circulate than mine, had 460,000, 468,000 views, and 489,000 views, respectively. My talk, by comparison, had 73,000 views, only 16% of the views of the lowest performing video in its immediate vicinity. My debate with Jamil Bowie, if I'm saying that correctly, a New York Times columnist with almost 500,000 followers on X, formerly Twitter, has performed even worse on TED's website. As of Tuesday, September 19th, after having almost over a month to circulate, it had a whopping 5,000 views. That makes it the 3rd worst performing video released by TED in all of 2023. And one of those views was mine, because I watched it live. Just saying. Either my TED content is performing extremely poorly because it is far less interesting than most of TED's content, or TED deliberately is not promoting it. A string of evidence points to the latter explanation. Unique among the TED Talks released around the same time as mine, my talk has still not been reposted to the TED Talks Daily podcast. In fact, it was not even posted to YouTube until I sent an email inquiry. Oh! So when they say website, they're talking about the actual TED website and not, as well, the YouTube channel. Interesting. According to its website, TED's mission is to, quote, discover and spread ideas that spark imagination, embrace possibility, and catalyze impact, unquote. They claim to be, quote, devoted to curiosity, reason, wonder, and the pursuit of knowledge without an agenda, unquote. My experience suggests otherwise, with TED falling far short of those ambitions and instead displaying all the hallmarks of an institution captured by the new progressive orthodoxy. TED's leadership must decide whether it wants to do something about it or let the organization become yet another echo chamber. Well, there you go. That was all the rigmarole, behind the scenes and otherwise, about the talk we just listened to. A very excellent, straightforward, tightly written talk, persuasive essay territory. I'd say, in all honesty, one of the best TED Talks I've watched as far as content and organization and structure and making your point. Of course, it seems like a very easy point to make, given what we're supposedly been working towards in this country since 1964. But there you go. It's something that needed to be done. And honestly, the opposition to it might be more interesting to me than the talk itself, right? I mean, a message that is so common sense, a message that stands in line with the principles laid out not only in our Constitution originally, in spirit, if not in effect at the time, but by the changes that have taken place in the time since. And certainly, again, from the 1964 Civil Rights Act and forward, and where the country was headed up until roundabouts 2012, 2013. And yet, even then, there is a segregated, by their own choice, ERG at TED that couldn't stand the idea of no longer being seen as victims simply on the basis of what you look like. Now, that's me making some assumptions about motivation there, but I got to tell you, I don't think I'm too far off the mark. Anyway, there you go. I'm actually kind of surprised that everything wrapped up as relatively briefly as it has. I thought it would take longer for me to get through all this, but I'll take a moment here for any comments you guys have. And by the way, just because I have to mention this now because of the way YouTube has decided to structure things, channels now, and especially notifications to their own subscribers, only work apparently if there is a constant flow of interaction on the content that is there, i.e. if videos don't get attention, then people subscribe to the channel won't get notifications of new content from the people they've subscribed to. So this isn't me sort of begging for attention so much as this is the new normal. So I have to ask. I'm glad to ask, and I appreciate it if you do. I don't blame you if you don't, because I never did this before. But if you like this kind of thing and you want to help out your fellow Scribe Tribe members, please do like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. And if you haven't already subscribed or hit the bell for notifications, please do so. There you go. There's my professional attention begging as it is. Anything you guys want to add to the conversation, as it were, please put in the comments now, or the chat, and I'll try to get to it for the next couple minutes. Programming note, there will still be a regular TED Excellence tomorrow, Thursday, at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. I've already selected what I'm going to look at, and boy, oh boy, guess what, guys? And I mean guys. We're going to find out what it really means, or should mean, to be a man in the modern day. Can't you wait to hear about correct masculinity versus that toxic stuff? I know I can't, but that'll be tomorrow, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on this channel. Let's see. C. Thomas, Scribe Tribe is... I know. That's why I almost never say it. It's a joke. It's totally a joke. It's like, what's up, Scribe Nation? That's right up there with that kind of thing. I say it as a joke. It was, I forget who came up with that first. I want to say it was Tailed Feature years and years and years ago. No, I take it back. It might not have been Tailed Feature. Tailed Feature suggested that my audience should be called scribers instead of subscribers, just scribers. That was his thing. I don't think I've ever used that before. But yeah, no, the Scribe Tribe thing is total joke. Don't take me seriously on that. It's like color blindness. It's not meant literally. Not meant literally. Let's see. Funk Joel Brother, can I get a link to the Discord? Well, Funk, you just you helped me out by reminding me of something that I almost forgot to do. So yes, I will get you a link to the Discord. One moment here. Let me get one generated for you. Let's see. Yes, I do have a Discord server. If you're interested in that kind of thing, not everybody is, but some people like it, where all my videos are posted and conversations related thereto take place, amongst other things. So a link is in the chat now. It's good for a day. And still, despite the request, it is required of you to do two things. First, click on the link. You'll find yourself on the landing channel called Say Hello. And in addition to saying hello, you have to give the secret word. The secret word tells me and my moderators that you actually watch the stream and have thus earned the right to join the Discord server. And today's secret word is Coleman. Just say, hello, Coleman, and that'll tell us all that you've watched the stream. So anything from anybody on here? Let's see. Drakenkönig der Wolfe. Drakenkönig der Wolf. Something like that. I'm doing my best fake German pronunciation. Well, if I didn't believe that the left was trying to silence the right, I do now. No. The left isn't trying to silence the right. They're trying to silence liberalism. That's the problem here. That was the most ridiculous thing about that social scientist saying, I like that you have conservative voices. No, it doesn't matter what the rest of Coleman Hughes' politics are. The message of that talk was not a conservative talk. It was a progressive talk as of 1964. And according to Coleman's own history lesson in the talk, as of the anti-slavery movement of the 1800s. So, no, he's not trying to silence the right. They're trying to silence liberalism, which tells you a lot about where the extreme left is these days. It's amazing, isn't it? Shadowclaw, it's amazing what was promoted when I was growing up is now considered evil, Scribe-like. Yeah, the fundamentals of a more just society are now evil, oppressive, racist, right-wing, etc. It's just amazing. It's sad too to have to witness it. I can only hope that the rubber band of history will bring us back to something more like normalcy, or actually on a actual progressive path in the near future. But with all that being said, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to wrap things up here. Again, if you like this kind of thing, please do share it out, like it, subscribe, hit the notification button. All that helps out with the algorithm now more so than ever, apparently, just for my own audience members. So I appreciate that. Same goes for any other content creator that you like. If you like their stuff, be sure to let people know that you do, because you guys are ultimately the best algorithm. Everyone, again, thank you for joining me. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everybody who donated, either to myself or to the fundraisers pinned to the top of the chat box, thank you guys so much for your generosity. Really do appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good rest of your Wednesday. Hope to see you tomorrow night, Thursday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for the regular TED Excellence. I'll have that posted up soon. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your week. Hope you're all safe and well. If you are not well, please get well soon, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.